I'm sure we will have lots of people who want to explore some of those possibilities for resistance when we move into breakout groups. Next we have Mary Robertson, who will be speaking on the financialisation of housing. And Mary, I believe you're a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Leeds? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, postdoctoral for the University of Leeds. I did my PhD here at SOAS in housing and finance, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm not going to try and distill a whole PhD in 5 minutes. I'm just going to talk about the points I think are particularly relevant for debt resistance in relation to housing. So there's been a huge increase in housing-related debt since the 1980s, not just in Britain, but across Europe and North America, and indeed many other parts of the world as well. This was in part a response to mortgage market liberalisation, but also it's tended to be tied up with the commodification of housing, so in particular the privatisation of social housing and the promotion of owner occupation as the dominant or default tenure form. And this promotion of owner occupation has had a key element, which is this idea that housing should serve as an asset as well as a form of shelter. So you've seen, especially in the UK, but elsewhere as well, you've seen successive governments spreading this idea or adhering to this idea that everyone can and should be homeowners and that housing should be treated not just as a place to live but as a financial nest egg. And this promotion of owner occupation has led to this huge expansion of mortgage lending and mortgage indebtedness, because for most people buying a home is contingent on getting a mortgage because their income can't cover the price of a house in itself. So just to give an indication of the quantitative significance of mortgage debt tends to be households' largest liability category in normal speak, the biggest debt that they have. So in the Euro area, it's 75% of total household debt. Obviously, there's variation across countries. I'm mainly focusing on the UK in what I say. And the UK tends to be at the upper end of mortgage debt levels. So just to give one figure, the ratio of mortgage debt to GDP in the UK increased by 50% between 1995 and 2005, from 53.3% to 80%. So mortgage debt in the UK in 2005 was 8% of GDP. I don't think it's gone down very much, even post-financial crisis. I don't have the figures off the top of my head. Okay, so the mere scale of mortgage lending and mortgage indebtedness mean that mortgage debt should be present, or housing-related debt should be present in a discussion like today's. However, I think that mortgage debt is something of an anomaly when it comes to discussions about debt resistance. And this is for a couple of reasons. So first of all, mortgage debt has a counterpart in a house, which has more and more, as I said, come to serve as an asset and a source of wealth. So in the UK, there's been sustained above inflation house price increases since the late 90s, at least, with some fluctuations, obviously. And these have meant that homeowners have reaped large capital gains. So mortgage indebtedness tends to come with an asset which has proved very lucrative for homeowners in the UK. So that's one anomaly. The second is that mortgage debt tends to be more prevalent among higher income groups. So to give you a figure of this, a recent study of a sample of 15 European countries found that only 7% of households in the lowest income quartile have mortgages, whereas 43% of households in the upper income quartile have mortgages. So it's kind of a rich person's debt. And this makes sense when you think that the poorest tend to be excluded from home ownership completely, so they don't have mortgage debt. So mortgage debt is a debt of the relatively privileged. It's those who can afford to buy a house, those who tend to be equity rich, and those in the UK, at least, as I say, dynamics are slightly different in other countries, who have benefited from significant above inflation house price increases in recent years. Now, this doesn't mean that debt resistance isn't necessary in relation to mortgage debt and housing. It just means it's got a peculiar character, and the resistance doesn't necessarily reside in, or the need for resistance doesn't necessarily reside in the impact of the debt on the debtors. It's more the impact of the debt on those who are excluded from this type of debt. But just to run through what I think are some of the problems with the way in which the housing system in the UK has become more and more organised around debt and credit, the mortgage market essentially. So first is mortgage lending is a form of credit creation. Right? As we've seen this huge expansion of mortgage lending since the 1980s, it's expanded the circulation of revenues and the amount of value that is chasing housing in the UK. Now this has driven up house prices, so essentially it's mortgage lending itself which underpins these dramatic above inflation house price increases. Now, these house price increases have encouraged this treatment of housing as an asset, and then therefore encouraged more people to come indebted to take on mortgage debt. And perhaps more importantly, they've effectively redistributed wealth away from those who don't own a home and towards those who do, by driving up the cost of accessing a house for people who don't own a home already. Right? That's problem number one. Another problem is that the expansion of mortgage lending has tended to be used to justify cutbacks in social housing. So there's an obvious contradiction in the idea that home ownership is available to all and that home ownership can be a lucrative asset, because one tends to undermine the other, right? Home ownership as a good asset requires house prices to go on increasing, whereas home ownership for all requires housing to be affordable for everybody. So there's this clear contradiction there. And for a long time, mortgage lending has been used to kind of bridge that gap or square that circle. I think the 2007 financial crisis was an assertion of that contradiction. You know, it was an attempt to show that this cycle of ever riskier lending secured on credit inflated house prices can't go on forever, but it's a lesson that so far the government at least are refusing to learn. Right? And the third problem is that credit-inflated house prices are highly volatile, which means that owner-occupiers essentially bear a great deal of risk. So I've been arguing that when it comes to mortgage debt, the real losers are those excluded from home ownership, rather than those who have a mortgage debt and also own a home. But this comes with a very big caveat concerning what happens if there's a sudden fall in house prices or a sudden increase in interest rates. You know? So it remains to be seen just how many current homeowners have taken on debt that will become unsustainable if interest rates go up, or that will be a negative equity when house prices fall. So to sum up, there are many reasons to resist a housing system based on debt, which is what we currently have. To some degree, homeowners may be a barrier to that resistance, or mortgage debtors may be a barrier to that resistance, because to some degree they've benefited from it. But it's leading to a very inequitable and unstable housing system. I'll stop. Thank you.